3 days ago, I received an invitation to teach in a school in Lincolnshire. My niece is teaching there at the moment, and she was the person who made the invitation. So I spoke to 2 classes of teenage school children, and they were remarkably well behaved. And in the course of the questions and answer sessions, one of the girls asked me whether as a monk I missed having any friends. And to be honest, a little bit miffed at what she meant. I was confused for a second or two. It seemed a complete non sequitur. But then I explained that although I live by myself, I feel extremely blessed by the number of good friendships, the number of good friends that I have made and kept over the past 34 years, more than that. And I think that when lay people or non-Buddhists look at the Sangha, they're often most taken by all the things that we don't do, the way that our lifestyle differs from that of the so-called ordinary person. But what they often fail to see, and it's of course quite expected that it should be so, is that we have in our communities the most wonderful, warm friendships which sustain us even from the very early period in our monastic lives when we are not perhaps as yet experiencing many of the fruits of the holy life. It's something that as monastics we can also take for granted, the fact that we live in communities in which, although there may be differences of opinion and there may be personality clashes or even conflicts, there is always, without doubt, an abiding sense of physical security and safety. We never, even for a moment, consider the possibility that a monk or a nun who is unhappy with us, angry even, for some reason or other, would ever resort to violence. Even the occasions of verbal violence that I've experienced over the past many years are so few and far between as to be really quite remarkable, unusual. As a monk or a nun, whatever possession we might have, we can put it down anywhere, and we know it will be there when we get back. No doubts about that at all. Even the idea that a fellow monk or nun would steal something out of our bag, it's just so bizarre as to be unthinkable. The idea that a fellow monk or nun would deliberately lie to us, seek to deceive us, cheat us in any way, again, it's hard to imagine. So these are wonderful features of our lives as monastics. I've just given a few leading examples, but there are so many ways in which our sila is not merely a matter of renunciation of things we'd rather like to do, but a means by which we create an atmosphere of warmth and mutual respect, mutual trust, and create the social environment which is most conducive to progress on the path to liberation. One of my favorite non-Buddhist quotations comes from the great Russian author Chekhov, playwright Chekhov, who wrote at the end of a letter that he wrote to a friend, he finished with the sentence, "I'm sorry, this is such a long letter. I didn't have enough time to write a shorter one." So why I like that is because it points to the fact that in the most beautiful, memorable and useful structures, there is the elegance comes from the fact that every single aspect, every single feature, or in the case of a play or a novel, every single word matters, means something. It's there for a purpose. And in our lives as monastics, the things that we let go of are the inessential. And we end up with a short letter rather than a long letter. And it's not a loss, but it's a creation of something memorable and lasting. So knowing when not to do is every bit as important a skill as knowing when to do. Or in our practice as monastics, we should be demonstrating to the lay Buddhists how keeping precepts voluntarily and with wisdom and humility is a path to peace and contentment. We are practicing what we preach, showing them that renunciation is not a grim and sorry way to live a life, but it is the foundation for a full and fulfilling life. I think that meditation practice has become something of a fetish for Western Buddhists. It's seen as a magic bullet, a panacea, that if you just get your meditation together, then everything else will fit into place. I don't agree with that, and I think that meditation really begins to have a transformative effect on our lives when it's fully grounded in the whole of the Eightfold Path, and that there's no cherry-picking of the teachings which we can fit into our lives. The Ajahn Chah would often say, you have to bring your heart to the Dhamma. You don't bring the Dhamma to your heart. And what he means by that is you don't pick and choose. You don't try to adapt the teachings according to your ideas, your needs or perceived needs. But you take on the whole of the Buddhist teachings with a humble heart and learn from the challenges that proceed from that. The forest tradition, particularly in Thailand, we're perceived as the strict ones. You say, "Oh, you're forest monks. You're very strict." And I don't know about you, fellow monastics, but I never felt particularly strict. My reply to this kind of statement is to make an analogy with a child. And if a child is obedient to its parents, we don't praise the child for being very strict. Say, "Oh, you're such a strict child. Your daddy tells you not to do something and you don't do it. How strict you are." Well, we think it's quite natural and obvious that the child should be obedient to its parents. And so, in the same way, I think as forest monks, we consider the Buddha like our father. The Vinaya was established by the Buddha for those of us who have voluntarily chosen to become bhikkhus. And so keeping the Vinaya is just being obedient to our Father's wishes. It's not a matter of being strict. So the Buddha laid these rules down, so we keep them out of respect and love and devotion to the Buddha. In the Visuddhimagga, Venerable Buddhaghosa, in discussing various elements of the practice, asks the question, what is the virtue which is most central, fundamental to a good, wise, complete practice of the Patimokkha? And his answer is faith. So with the faith in the Buddha's enlightenment and the faith in the Buddha's wisdom, in his establishment of the Vinaya, then we keep the rules out of love and respect for the Buddha. And when we consider it in that way, then a lot of the frustration that we're banging our head against the cage bars of the cage is dissipated a great deal. Feel a pride, a wholesome pride in keeping precepts, which is very strengthening to the mind. There's a very unusual, unprecedented activity going on in Bangkok at the moment, where one of the largest sort of upmarket shopping malls in Bangkok has been taken over, at least one whole floor of it, some 70,000-80,000 square meters of it, for a Buddhist fair, part of the 2,600-year celebrations for the Buddha, the idea of taking Buddhism into the heart of the city. So many things taking place in this space, but one part of it, one corner of it, one area, is devoted to meditation. And I asked the organizers to place many post-it notes on the wall with pens. And so they're printed, they're already written as "My name is," and then you fill in your name, and it says, would like to dedicate, and then there's a space, minutes, or to offer, so many minutes to the Buddha, too many minutes of meditation to the Buddha. So somebody comes in and they want to meditate for 5 minutes as an offering to the Buddha, then they write their name of 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes. And I got this idea, of course, from the teaching that you may be familiar of the two kinds of worship or reverence to be paid to the Buddha, one with material things, amisa puja, with candles and incense and so on. And there's the offering of practice. And the Buddha in the Majjhima Nikaya says that he prefers the offering of practice. And this idea of an offering of practice is one skillful means that we may employ if we start to feel a little bit guilty about not meditating on a regular basis, but not quite guilty enough to resume the practice or to maintain it at the previous level. So why is it people get lazy about meditation or even monastics? Well, I think number of reasons. One is an unwillingness or a lack of interest in keeping track of the benefits of meditation on our daily life. But another is a certain complacency that arises when we feel reasonably calm, reasonably grounded, no big emotional dramas going on, feeling quite good. And then the thought, the conscious or maybe semi-conscious is, well, I don't really need to meditate right now because I'm feeling pretty good already. And the way to deal with that kind of complacency, reluctance, and laziness is to say, well, you're not doing it for yourself. You don't have. If you meditate for yourself, you might think, I'd rather go to sleep, I'd rather do something else. So I'm willing to go without that right now. So skillful means is you say, I'm going to make an offering to the Buddha of 20 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour or whatever of meditation, or might make a decision to meditate in order to share merit with a parent or parents or departed ones. The idea is that we cut through that idea of meditation as something you're doing for yourself, which is almost inevitably leads to an up and down, inconsistent kind of practice, depending on how you feel about yourself right now, to one which can be consistent because it's an offering. You're making an offering to the Buddha, you're dedicating merit to parents. Of course, if your meditation practice is stabilized now and is not subject to these kinds of fluctuations, then these skillful means might not be necessary. But for many people, there needs to be a certain effort and effort put into developing skillful means to care for the quality of our intention and our aspiration and our interest, enthusiasm for practice. This interest, enthusiasm, devotion, commitment to practice. All these words are expressed in the Pali phrase chanda. So the Buddha pointing out two kinds of motivation. It's the motivation derived by tanha, craving, and that motivated by chanda or Dhamma chanda. So when we begin our meditation practice, we need to check whether or not our mind is primarily motivated by tanha or chanda. If the mind is lacking this interest, devotion in the process, but is more focused on the results of practice, then that's the sign of tanha or craving. If the interest is in the process itself, in the learning process of meditation, then we will have a good motivation, a chanda motivation. Good analogy for our attitude to practice is given by the analogy of someone swimming across a lake towards an island in the center of the lake. Now, if the swimmer is overly concerned with the island, and he's got his head, or she's got her head above the water, and she's constantly looking at the island, there's certain consequences. One, he or she will probably become very frustrated that they seem to be making very slow progress, and an impatience arises. How much longer? How much longer? It still seems so far away, so on. And at the same time, lifting the head up from the water means that the swimming stroke itself is inefficient, and means that the swimming it becomes even slower than it would be without the focus on the goal. So the wise person determines his goal, in this case, the island in the middle of the lake, and then puts his effort into swimming, making each stroke as good as possible, and enjoying the sensation of swimming. And every now and again, just pops his head up, just checks that he's still swimming in a direct line with the island, and then returns to the process of swimming, to the swimming stroke. So rather than seeing swimming as merely the prerequisite or the necessary condition for reaching the island, swimming is given a value, an inherent value. It's given a respect and an interest for itself. This is the attitude of chanda. So if we have an idea that samadhi is like this, vipassana is like this, and we've got to go through all this drudgery and trying to take the mind out of the ambit of the hindrances, then every time we have a hindrance arising or a challenge in meditation, we feel frustrated and downhearted, and maybe we just want to give up altogether, decide we don't have what it takes to meditate. So this is wrong thinking that cripples our minds. So I have a way I like to talk about meditation in which I refer to the present moment as the classroom. So I very much like the idea of the Buddhist path to liberation, to enlightenment, as the most comprehensive, most perfect education system that the world has ever seen. Education of conduct, an education of the emotions, an education of the intellect, an education of the heart. A perfect holistic system in which every part has an important role to play. But continuing this analogy, say if the Buddha's teachings are in fact an education system, as I'm proposing, then where is the classroom? Where do you learn? And my answer is, it's the present moment. So there is so much talk, reference to living in the present moment in Eastern religious discourse and in New Age discourse, that sometimes it seems to be an end in itself. Just be in the present moment, be in the now. But I would like to suggest that the now, being in the now, is entering the classroom. So the things that we are trying to learn are lessons of direct experience. We're not learning about the Four Noble Truths. We're seeking to experience the Four Noble Truths. And to experience the Four Noble Truths, you have to be in the present moment. So we're not sort of deifying the present moment and making it, more than it is, but you have to be there before any real work, any more real education can take place. So meditation techniques, so many of them, but they're all trying to help us to sustain a clear, bright, sharp, alert wakefulness in the present moment, helping us to sustain the sense of knowing in the present moment for a considerable time. So Buddha, as you know, the word Buddha means awakened one. It's awakening. It's being awake. So this leads me on to another point, which a very important point I'd like to share with you is just how crucial, how important it is to talk to yourself in the right way. Now, you may think I'm interested in talking to myself because I live by myself and I don't have any option, really, but I'm really referring to how we articulate what we're doing, because we comment on experience, and that's an addiction that we all have, and it can be very harmful one. But apart from that, we are always framing situations, framing perceptions, framing our activities, and we have to be aware of the frame through which we're seeing things. That's often a verbal frame. Just now I spoke about changing the frame from I am meditating so that I can become peaceful, or so that I can get rid of this, I can become that, or so whatever. So moving away from a self-centered idea of meditation as a personal journey, and on occasions balancing that with the idea of meditation, spiritual practice, as an offering, either an offering to the Triple Gem, or as a creation of merit which we can then share with our benefactors. But in every stage of practice, we need to make conscious the narrative that we're creating for ourselves, the frame through which we understand what we are doing, because it can have both a beneficial and a detrimental effect. So we need to choose, we see, the most beneficial way of understanding this. A very simple expression of this: how do you feel when you say concentrate on your breath? There's a certain heaviness, isn't there? Sort of rigidity. You concentrate on your breath. There's not an immediate kind of joy arises in most people when they're told to concentrate on something. And one meditation technique that I've developed in Thailand is to tell people, don't concentrate on your breath. What I want you to do is enjoy. Enjoy the sensation of an inhalation. Enjoy the sensation of an exhalation. What does that really mean? How can you enjoy that? Or appreciate, fully appreciate an inhalation, fully appreciate an exhalation. So when you meditate, how do you perceive what you're actually doing during a meditation? What do you do? Do you think I'm concentrating on something? I'm trying to make my mind peaceful, or I'm, so many different ways of explaining it to ourselves, of understanding it. And it's not necessarily that there's, we're talking about a right way or a wrong way here, but encouraging you to observe the way in which your articulation or your understanding of exactly what you're doing conditions your experience and results of your experience. So learning to develop wise and sustaining perceptions is the work of yoniso manasikara. This is what we call wise reflection, using the thinking mind well and wisely. It's a skill to be developed. The practice of meditation is not merely a means of applying particular techniques. It's your willingness to apply the technique that can often be crucial. So you may know all the reflections and all the amassed observations of great meditators, but whether or not you apply them is another matter altogether. So this would take me on to matter of dealing with pain in meditation. There are many different attitudes to this, and advice from meditation masters varies. Some of the forest teachers really encourage people to sit through painful feeling until you come out the other side. That is certainly a liberating experience, and the ability to practice well with pain in the controlled environment of sitting meditation means that you're creating important life skills, preparing yourself for serious illness when you may well be challenged by uncontrollable pain. So in meditation, we're sitting because we want to sit, we've chosen to sit, and we can sit for as long as we want to sit, and we can look at pain for as long as we want to look at pain. So it's a very comfortable, relatively speaking, environment in which to learn about physical pain and to master our fear of physical pain, which is inextricably tied up with our fear of death. So there's a lot to be said for sitting with pain and being patient with physical discomfort. But, and there is an important but, if every time you sit, you have to bear with a lot of physical pain, before very long you'll lose your chanda, you'll lose your enthusiasm, you'll lose your enjoyment of meditation, and you'll find yourself finding more and more reasons to cut short meditation sessions or to miss them altogether. So my advice is that whereas sitting with physical pain is an extremely important path to follow, it should only be followed occasionally. What is more important in the long run is to maintain a real sense of interest and enthusiasm and love of the meditation process itself, the work itself, the effort itself. And that every now and again make a meditation, a specific vedana or pain meditation, but not to do it too much, to know your limits. As regards the practice itself, we can distinguish two main kinds of meditation on pain. The first is what we might loosely call samatha. So samatha is an umbrella term for all those techniques which seek to reduce or eliminate negative emotions and to promote and maximize positive emotions. And the practice here is founded upon a basic psychological principle that in any mind moment, the mind is either wholesome or unwholesome. Physical pain is almost always an amalgam of physical and mental phenomena. The mental reaction to pain, which may consist of aversion, fear, anxiety, depression, whatever, arises so quickly and so habitually that non-meditators automatically assume that this union of physical and mental phenomena is one thing called pain. Through deliberately cultivating a wholesome mental state, we can displace or replace the unwholesome mental reaction to physical pain with a wholesome response. And if we are successful, then the physical pain itself will remain. But often when the physical pain is uncoupled from the mental reaction, it is surprisingly mild. This in itself is a major breakthrough in practice, real wisdom there from being able to separate physical and mental phenomena in this way. So practically, how would we do that? One very simple technique is to imagine the breath as a very gentle wind, gentle breeze, just blowing in and out of the painful area. So the sense of caressing, there with a loving, kind caress of the painful area with the breath. So obviously the breath is not entering in, passing through that area of pain, but we can create the perception that it is. It's a skillful, wise perception. So there is a sense of acceptance. So with that, the breath coming in and out, caressing with loving kindness the area of pain, the mind is in a wholesome state. And if the mind is in a wholesome state, all those negative fears and anxieties and so on cannot be present. They can't coexist with the wholesome mental state of kindness and acceptance. So there are many different wholesome reflections and perceptions which we can use based upon the same principle of replacing the negative with the positive. The vipassana techniques, again, vary in the three characteristics. Change is the most easily perceived, of course, and so we can leave our meditation on the breath or on the mantra Buddho or whatever our chosen object may be, and we make the sensation of pain the object temporarily. And there are three aspects of pain that we can focus on in this particular practice. One is the location of the pain, secondly the characteristics of the pain, and third the intensity of the pain. So if we don't look closely at pain, it can seem to be one big mass of sensation. But if we look at it very carefully and with interest, we begin to see that the pain is shifting around. It's not a solid mass. There's energy moving around all the time. There's nothing solid and permanent there at all. Look at the characteristics of the pain. Whether the pain is a shooting pain, an ache, a burn, whatever it may be, that characteristic is unstable. The intensity of the pain is coming in waves. It builds to a climax and then recedes. So the effort to observe the impermanence, the instability, the insubstantiality of the sensation through focusing on the location, the characteristic, and the intensity of pain is the direct work of wisdom. But again, it's benefiting from this principle that the effort to investigate the nature of pain with equanimity does replace the unwholesome mental reactions to pain, because the effort to observe and to learn is in itself a wholesome Dhamma. So we are as monastics, particularly, our lives are founded on patience, but patient endurance shouldn't be plucked from its context. It's one part of holy life. The Buddha gave it central importance. It's the supreme incinerator of defilements, but we should always remember that it needs to be tempered by, governed by wisdom. The willingness to bear with the unpleasant is a important maturing factor in the mind, what we call a parami. But it can be taken too far. You can sit and then go through pain in the knees until you have to go to hospital and have an operation on them. And that's happened to a number of monks in the past. So wisdom, we always keep coming back to the wisdom faculty. Ajahn Chah used to talking to the villages in northeast of Thailand, or in the old days anyway, mostly living off, the only protein source would be little fish that live in the streams, in the paddy fields. So they'd be fishermen. So although Ajahn Chah would encourage them to keep 5 precepts, every now and again he gives them examples from the world of fishing. So he said it's like someone who goes to a pond where there are no fish and starts off early in the morning, incredibly diligent, hard-working, puts so much effort by the end of the day, has got no fish. It's very discouraged. It's not fair. I've worked so hard. I've got no result. And becomes very downhearted. But as Ajahn Jayasaro said, the problem is not the effort, it's not the sincerity, it's not the energy, it's that it's wrongly directed. No matter how motivated you are, how hard-working you are, if you're trying to fish in a pond that has no fish, you're not going to be successful. So if you're looking in the wrong direction, your focus of your practice is wrong, you can't assume that because you put so much effort and energy into it, that it must necessarily be correct or that you deserve something in return. You might be going completely the wrong direction. So, would like to make the point that the point that Ajahn Chah would make again and again, that practice is not a function of posture. That this has to be a practice which is independent of posture, meaning meditation or cultivation is not restricted to any one particular posture, not sitting or walking, but it's a whole way of being in the world. We're cultivating an awakefulness, an alertness, a clarity of mind. It's simply that in sitting and walking, we're able to give our whole attention to this cultivation without external distractions. But our ability to cultivate this alertness and this clarity and brightness of mind in the formal meditation is going to depend a great deal on how we care for our mind outside of the meditation or off the meditation cushion. And in the same way, our ability to maintain clarity, awareness, this bright, clear mind in daily life is going to depend a great deal on the amount of time we're willing to devote to developing it in the formal meditation practices. So these things affect each other. They both have to be in place for progress to be made. So one of my favorite short stories is of a monk on Tudong walking towards the mountain, passes this old lady, and he says, "Grandmother, grandmother, how long will it take me to get to the mountain?" And she's just sitting there, she ignores him. And he said, "Grandmother, grandmother, how long will it take me to get to the mountain?" And she still doesn't answer. So, yes, you have to do this 3 times. So he says, 3rd time, he said, "Grandmother, grandmother, how long will it take me to get to the mountain?" And she still doesn't answer. So he just assumes that she's deaf. And so he walks on. He's walked on a few paces, and then the voice rings out, "Another 2 months," or something like this. And he turns around and he said, "Well, why couldn't you have told me that to begin with when I asked you just now?" He said, "Well, I had to see how fast you were walking and how determined you were before I could answer." So the path is, determined by both the constancy of our effort, the podi quality, just right, not too much, not too little, not too stiff, not too loose, and constantly fine-tuning that effort, because it's not that once you get this sense of podi, then you can relax, because as conditions change, the right amount, the podi amount changes also. But also having this wisdom, observation, learning from experience. When I was first in Thailand, I loved one of these little phrases that are written on pieces of wood and nailed into the trees there for people to reflect on. And it says, Mak ngai da yak, lambak de di, which means like, if you're sloppy and sort of sloppy, then it's difficult to make progress. But when you, or if you just want the easy way, yes, let's say that, always taking the easy way, what became known as going with the flow, I think, then you won't ever be very successful. But lambak, lambak means problems, tribulations, difficulties. That's where you really grow, that's where you really learn. So if your intention, if your understanding of practice is of learning, this is an education, then your attitude to difficulties changes immediately. You know, these are where you really learn. This is where the learning takes place, and sometimes the easy periods where everything's flowing smoothly are maybe not so helpful in the long run. It's not the sure thing. It's minor. So remember that the Arahant is referred to as the Aseka Pugala. So Aseka means the graduate, one who is no longer in need of any education. So everyone other than the Arahant is referred to someone who is still in need of education. And this is the education that the Buddha provided to us, and an education that we can acquire in the classroom of the present moment. So thank you for your attention this evening. I'd like to end the talk at this point.